Sometimes life gives you the strangest offers. They offered me $700. $700? Every month. Just to disappear. Not to move away. Not to quit my job. But to vanish quietly, as if I had never existed in their perfect little world. And that night, sitting at their shiny marble table, surrounded by silver cutlery and polite smiles, I realized money isn't always offered to help you. Sometimes it's used to erase you. They thought I was a struggling single mum, barely holding things together. They looked at my worn-out car, my simple dress, and they decided what I was worth. $700. That was the price tag they put on my dignity, but what they didn't know was that I was never the poor one at that table. I just chose to live quietly, because sometimes silence is the only armor a woman has. And when the truth finally surfaced, when I showed them who I really was, it wasn't their money that spoke the loudest that night. This story isn't just about revenge. It's about how a woman, who had been underestimated all her life, taught the powerful what real value means. It's about justice, grace, and the quiet strength that only years of survival can teach you. And if you've ever been judged by your clothes, your car, or your job, if someone has ever looked at you and decided you were less than, then this story is for you. Because what happens next is something you'll want to see all the way to the end. The real surprise doesn't come when the truth is revealed. It comes when they realize what that truth cost them. Before we begin, if life has ever made you feel invisible, take a moment to subscribe. You won't want to miss the stories that remind us how unseen people can have the strongest light of all. Now, let's go back to that night, the night they tried to pay me to vanish. The night I decided to finally be seen. I remember exactly how quiet my life used to be. Mornings began before sunrise, with the soft hum of the old coffee maker and the creak of wooden floors that had seen better days. The house was small, but it was mine. The walls carried the faint scent of lavender and old paint, and though the furniture was worn, it felt safe, like an old friend that never asked for more than you could give. Every day had the same rhythm. I'd make breakfast, pack Daniel's lunch, and watch him drive away with that hopeful look only youth can wear. He was my reason for everything. I told him we were fine, that we had enough, and he believed me. Maybe because I'd learned to make enough sound like plenty. After he left, the silence would return. I'd sit by the window, sip my coffee, and look across the street at the neighbours' new cars gleaming in the morning sun. It never bothered me, not really. I wasn't chasing the shine anymore. I'd had my share of it once, and I knew how easily it blinds you. People in town thought I worked as a bookkeeper for an architecture firm. That was true, partly. What they didn't know was that the firm had my name on the founding papers, though I'd never told anyone. I preferred it that way. Titles have a way of changing how people treat you, and I'd grown tired of being treated differently. I'd learned to live below the noise, in a place where no one asked questions, and no one expected answers. My days were steady, predictable, the kind of quiet that most people find boring, but for me it was peace. Peace, after years of storms. Still, every once in a while, something inside me stirred, a whisper that wondered if silence was really safety, or just another kind of hiding. Daniel had recently told me he was getting engaged. Her name was Claire. Sweet girl, polite, full of dreams. When I met her for the first time, I saw a little of myself at that age, eager to please, always apologising for taking up space. She told me her parents wanted to meet me soon. They're very traditional, she said with a nervous smile. I just nodded and said, that's fine, dear. I've met all kinds of people in this world. That night, as I folded the laundry, I found myself wondering what kind of people they were. Traditional can mean many things. Sometimes it means kind. Sometimes it means cruel, wrapped in good manners. A week later, Daniel called to say they'd invited us for dinner. Mom, just be yourself, he said, half laughing. They're a bit fancy, but they'll love you. I smiled into the phone and said, oh, honey. People like that don't love people like me, but I'll be polite. He didn't understand what I meant. How could he? He'd never had to read between words or smiles. He'd never had to measure how small to make himself to fit into someone else's comfort. I'd spent a lifetime doing that. The morning of the dinner, I opened my closet and stared at the row of plain blouses. I chose a soft grey one, pressed it carefully and tied my hair back the way I always did for meetings. Simple, neat, invisible. It's funny how invisibility becomes a habit, one that fits like second skin. Before I left, I checked my email. A reminder popped up from my assistant. Board meeting rescheduled to Monday. You'll need to approve the final contracts for Beaumont Estates. I paused. Beaumont. The name sounded familiar, though I couldn't place it right away. I clicked the document, architectural plans, client Charles and Veronica Beaumont. I sat there for a moment, looking at the name. Then I smiled. Fate has a strange sense of humour. I closed the laptop, grabbed my purse and whispered to myself, let's see what kind of people they really are. That evening, as I drove through the quiet suburban streets toward their house, the sky was painted with the colours of dusk, soft gold fading into blue. I remember thinking how beautiful everything looked from the outside. But beauty, I've learned, is just the cover page of most lies. I didn't know then that this dinner would change everything. That behind the polite smiles and the silver spoons waited an insult wrapped in good intentions, and I certainly didn't know. That the name Beaumont on that contract wasn't just another client. It was about to become the stage for a lesson money could never buy. The Beaumonts lived on the far edge of town, where the streets grew wider and quieter, and every house looked like it was competing to be admired. Their home sat behind tall iron gates, surrounded by trimmed hedges so perfect they almost looked fake. As I drove up, I caught my reflection in the car window. Plain blouse, no jewellery, hair neatly tied. I didn't look like someone who belonged here. That, I suppose, was the point. The gates opened slowly, as if deciding whether I was worthy to enter. A young man in a dark uniform waved me through. The driveway curved past a fountain shaped like an angel pouring water from a golden bowl. I parked near the steps, where the front door loomed like the entrance to another world. Veronica Beaumont greeted me first. She was tall, poised, every hair in place, her smile practiced to perfection. Her perfume reached me before her words did. "Evelyn, dear," she said, extending a hand with long red nails. "How wonderful to finally meet you." Her eyes, however, told another story. The quick scan of my shoes, my bag, the pause that lingered a second too long. Charles Beaumont followed. A man with silver hair and a watch that probably cost more than my car. His handshake was firm but cold. "Daniel speaks highly of you," he said politely, though I could tell he didn't quite mean it. Their home looked like the inside of a magazine. Marble floors, soft lighting, paintings that probably had stories no one in the room actually cared about. A woman in uniform appeared silently to take my coat. Claire ran down the hallway, her face bright. "Mom, Dad, this is Evelyn," she said excitedly. She hugged me tightly, and for a moment the room softened. I could see why Daniel loved her. She had a way of bringing warmth into a place that clearly wasn't used to it. Veronica led us into the living room. The furniture was the kind you sit on carefully, afraid to wrinkle the cushions. "Would you like some tea?" she asked, but didn't wait for an answer. "Jasmine, perhaps. It's calming." I sat with my hands in my lap, watching the way she moved, graceful, deliberate, the kind of woman who built her confidence out of other people's insecurities. "So, Evelyn," she began, "Daniel tells us you've worked in accounting for quite some time." "Yes," I replied. "I handle consulting for a few architecture firms." Her lips curved slightly. "Oh, that's lovely. My husband always says creative people need someone practical to keep their books in order." She laughed softly, and Charles chuckled, though his eyes never left the crystal glass he was turning in his hand. Claire, bless her heart, tried to change the subject. Mum, Evelyn's company actually worked on the new community library project. Isn't that amazing? Veronica tilted her head. Oh, really? That must have been quite the opportunity. Her tone said she was impressed. Her eyes said she wasn't. She turned to me again. And do you enjoy it? The work, I mean. I do, I said, smiling. Numbers tell stories too. You just have to know how to read them. Charles leaned forward. Do you own your own firm? Something like that, I replied gently. Partnerships can take many forms. He nodded, uninterested, as if the conversation had reached the edge of his patience. A silence settled, thin and uncomfortable. I'd been in rooms like this before, rooms where people smiled through their judgment, where every word was weighed, every breath measured. I had learned long ago that the best way to survive them was to stay calm and let the silence work for you. Claire tried again. Mum? Dad? Evelyn brought you something. She reached for the small box I'd placed on the coffee table. Veronica unwrapped it delicately. Inside was a handmade keychain carved from walnut wood, in the shape of a small house engraved with the words "Home is built with hearts, not walls." Oh, she said after a pause. How quaint. She smiled, but her tone dripped with polite dismissal. Did you make this yourself? Yes, I answered. I used to carve as a hobby. It helps me think. Charles examined it. Interesting craftsmanship, he murmured, turning it over. His brow furrowed slightly. This logo here, isn't that from Harper & Field's architecture? I nodded. It is. He hesitated, then placed it back in the box. Small world, he said quietly. Veronica leaned forward. Well, thank you, dear. It's very personal. Her phone buzzed, and she excused herself with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I watched her leave the room, her heels clicking like a metronome counting down to the next judgment. Charles shifted in his seat. You must be proud of Daniel, he said. He's doing well for himself. We've made sure he never had to struggle too much. I smiled faintly. That's kind of you. I suppose some lessons are only learned through struggle. He gave me a polite look that meant he disagreed. When Veronica returned, she seemed brighter, almost cheerful. Dinner's ready, she announced. I do hope you like salmon. It's wild caught, of course. We moved to the dining room, where a long table gleamed beneath a chandelier that looked like it could light a ballroom. Place cards waited for each of us. Mine was set at the far end opposite Veronica. A small detail, but one that said everything. As the first course was served, she raised her glass. To family, she said sweetly, and to understanding where we all fit in. Everyone smiled, glasses clinking. But as I looked around that glittering table, I felt something shift inside me. Not anger, not even sadness, but a quiet certainty. I had spent years letting people decide my worth. That night, I decided I would let them see what happens when they underestimate the wrong woman. They thought they were hosting a simple dinner. They had no idea they'd just invited the lesson of their lives. Dinner began like a performance, every movement rehearsed, every word delivered with a smile that hid a question. The table glittered. Under the chandelier, silver forks resting beside folded linen napkins. I could almost hear the hum of unspoken judgments between the clinking glasses. Veronica sat at the head of the table, commanding attention without effort. She had that kind of practiced grace, the sort that came from years of being obeyed. Her husband, Charles, filled his role too, silent, observing, ready to nod at the right moment. Daniel and Claire sat across from each other, nervous, trying too hard to make it all feel normal. and there I was, at the far end, the quiet guest who didn't quite belong. Veronica broke the silence first. "So, Evelyn," she began, gently slicing her salmon, "Claire tells me you've worked with architecture firms for years. That must be interesting." "It is," I said with a small smile. "I've always liked helping things take shape, from a blank page to a structure that stands tall." "How poetic," she replied, taking a sip of wine. "I suppose you handle the financial side of things?" "Yes," I said. "Budgets, projections, negotiations, that sort of thing." Charles glanced up. "So, numbers. You keep the dreamers in check." I nodded. "Someone has to." He chuckled politely, then added, "You must know how to make a little stretch a long way. That's an admirable skill." I knew what he meant. In a single sentence, he'd reduced me to my supposed struggle. I didn't flinch. I'd been underestimated before. It no longer stung. It amused me. Veronica leaned forward slightly. "I've always believed that hard work is noble, though some people work hard simply because they have no choice." Her tone was light, conversational, but the meaning was sharp enough to cut glass. I met her eyes and smiled softly. "And some work hard because they choose to, Mrs. Beaumont. There's a difference." The air tightened, delicate but charged. She held my gaze for a moment, then laughed, a sound too sweet to be sincere. "Touché." Claire, sweet Claire, tried to change the subject. "Mum, Evelyn's company actually contributed to the downtown renovation project. You remember that park opening last year?" Veronica smiled. "Oh, yes, the one with the fountain." "That broke within a month." Her tone was honeyed, but the sting landed anyway. Daniel frowned slightly, shifting in his chair. "Mum," he said, "that wasn't her fault." "Oh, of course not," Veronica replied, patting his hand. "I'm only teasing." Then, turning to me, "You know how these public projects go. So much red tape, so little reward." "I suppose it depends on what you consider a reward," I said evenly. Charles changed the topic to real estate. He spoke about property values, tax deductions, and investment portfolios. I nodded politely at the right moments, offering a word or two to keep the peace. It was the kind of conversation built to exclude, full of names dropped like coins on a marble counter. After the main course, the maid brought coffee and dessert. Veronica's smile returned, the kind that always precedes a strike. "You know," she began, "Claire's father and I were talking about how family dynamics can be complicated, especially when people come from very different backgrounds." Her words floated across the table like perfume, pleasant at first, then suffocating. "I agree," I said quietly. "But I've found that respect makes those differences easier to live with." "True," she said, setting down her cup. "But respect has to be earned, doesn't it?" I let the silence hang. Across the table, Claire looked mortified. Daniel opened his mouth to speak, but I raised a hand slightly, a gesture to let him know I could handle it. "Some people," I said softly, "earn it quietly. Not by shouting about what they have, but by showing what they've survived." The room grew still. Even the ticking clock on the wall seemed to pause. Veronica smiled again, but her eyes flickered. "That's quite profound, Evelyn. I can see where Daniel gets his stubborn streak." I smiled back. "He gets his kindness from me too." Charles cleared his throat. "Well, I think we can all agree that Daniel has done well for himself. He's young, talented, and ambitious." "Yes," Veronica added, "and with the right support he'll continue to thrive. That's what families are for, isn't it?" Her words lingered, heavy with implication. The table fell quiet. I knew exactly where this conversation was headed. I leaned back, took a slow sip of coffee and said, "Families are for many things, Mrs. Beaumont. Support, yes, but also acceptance. Sometimes the most valuable thing we can give our children is the freedom to make their own choices." Her lips curved into that polished smile again. "You're very wise, Evelyn, though I imagine wisdom like that comes from experience." The subtle emphasis on experience wasn't lost on me. It meant age, class, past. I smiled politely. Experience is the one thing money can't buy. You have to live to earn it. A faint blush crept into her cheeks, not from embarrassment but irritation. Claire jumped in quickly. "Evelyn, would you like to see the garden after dinner? Mum just had it redone." "Of course," I said gently. "I'd love to." The rest of the meal passed in fragments, laughter that didn't reach the eyes, compliments that disguised comparison. By the time dessert plates were cleared, I could sense the unease under Veronica's smile. She wanted control, but she didn't quite know how to handle someone who wouldn't play the part she'd assigned. When I rose to leave, she placed a manicured hand on mine. "I do hope we can be honest with each other, Evelyn. After all, Daniel's future means everything to us." I met her gaze, calm and steady. "Honesty," I said, "is a good place to start." Her smile faltered just slightly as I stepped out into the cool night air. The wind carried the faint scent of her perfume, expensive, sharp, unforgettable. I breathed it in and let it fade. In my car, I looked back once at the glowing windows of their grand house. Every light was on, as if the world inside had to stay bright to hide the shadows it was built upon. That night, I realized something. The real danger of people like the Beaumonts wasn't their wealth or arrogance. It was how ordinary their cruelty could look when dressed in elegance. And I knew. This was only the beginning. The next morning, the sunlight broke through the curtains like a secret trying to be kept. I woke up earlier than usual, replaying every moment of the dinner in my mind. The laughter that wasn't laughter, the compliments that carried edges sharp enough to draw blood. Daniel called just after 9. "Mom," he said hesitantly, They really liked you." His voice cracked slightly, betraying what he didn't say. I smiled even though he couldn't see it. "That's sweet, honey. Don't worry about me. I can handle polite company." He laughed nervously. "It's just, Mom, they're different, you know? They have their way of doing things." "I noticed," I replied softly. "But every family does." I could hear Claire in the background whispering something. "They want to have another dinner tonight," Daniel added quickly. "Just a small one. You and me and her parents. More personal. That was the word people used when they wanted to say uncomfortable, but pretending otherwise. I agreed, because some lessons in life can only be taught when you're willing to sit at the same table twice. That evening, I drove back to the Beaumont estate. The gates opened slower this time, as though they too sensed what was coming. Inside, the house glowed with low, warm light. Veronica greeted me with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Evelyn," she said, "thank you for coming again. I thought it would be nice to talk." "Just us." "Of course," I replied. "I appreciate the invitation." Charles stood by the fireplace, holding a glass of brandy. "Would you like something to drink?" he offered. "No, thank you," I said. "I'll stay clear-headed tonight." We sat around a smaller dining table this time. There were no maids, no appetizers laid out in delicate rows, only coffee, and the thick tension that comes when truth is about to be negotiated. Veronica began softly. "The way a storm begins with only a whisper of wind. Evelyn, I hope you understand. We just want what's best for Daniel and Claire." "I never doubted that," I answered calmly. She smiled, tilting her head slightly. "You see, Daniel is at a very delicate point in his career, and marriage, as you know, can either lift a man or anchor him." I looked at her, my expression steady. "I see," she continued. "We know you've done your best as a mother, Raising a son alone? That can't have been easy. You should be proud. Pity, I've learned, is the cruelest form of condescension. I am proud, I said simply. She nodded, satisfied with my restraint. Good, because now it's time for Daniel to move forward, to have the kind of life he deserves. And to do that, sometimes we have to make difficult choices. Charles set his glass down. We've been thinking, he said. It might be best if you gave them some space. Space? I asked, though I already knew. Yes, Veronica said smoothly. They'll be starting a family soon and, well, young couples need freedom, independence. I understand, I replied. What exactly are you suggesting? She folded her hands as if she were about to pray. We'd like to help you, financially, so you can be comfortable, and Daniel can focus on his future. How generous, I murmured. It's not charity, she said quickly. It's gratitude, for raising such a fine young man. Charles reached into his jacket pocket and slid a white envelope across the table. I looked at it. The edge of it touched the reflection of the chandelier above, one glimmer of light on something heavy with meaning. Inside was a check. $700 per month, she said. For my silence, for my distance, for my disappearance. I don't understand, I said quietly. You're offering me an allowance? A gesture, Veronica replied. You've worked hard enough. Let us take care of you now. I stared at the check. The numbers were small, but their message was enormous. $700, the cost of absence, the price of erasure. I let the silence grow thick, and then said softly, That's generous. But unnecessary. Veronica's smile faltered. I hope you don't take this the wrong way. It's just that appearances matter. You understand how people talk. I do, I said. Better than you think. She leaned forward. Then let's not make this harder than it needs to be. Take it, think of it as a kindness. I looked at her, really looked. The perfect hair, the flawless skin, the eyes that had never once known hunger or fear. And I realized she believed every word she said. You think kindness comes with a price tag? I said softly. But real kindness costs you something you can't write on a check. Her jaw tightened. I didn't mean to offend you. Of course not, I replied. You meant to make me disappear. There's a difference. Daniel shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Mum, he started, but I stopped him with a look. It's all right, Daniel, I said. Your future mother-in-law is just being honest. Veronica took a slow breath. We're just trying to protect our family. And I'm trying to protect mine, I said gently. We're not so different, Mrs. Beaumont. We just measure worth in very different currencies. Charles stood, clearly wanting to end the conversation. Let's not turn this into something unpleasant. I rose too. It already is. Veronica held out the envelope once more. Please, at least think about it. I took it, not because I wanted the money, but because every story needs proof of its insult. I smiled. Thank you. I'll think about it. As I turned to leave, Veronica said, I knew you'd understand. After all, every woman has her price. I looked back at her and said quietly, You're right. Mine just isn't printed in ink. When I stepped outside, the night air hit my face like cold truth. I stood there for a moment, the envelope still in my hand. $700, 700 reasons to disappear. I tore it in half. Then in half again, letting the pieces fall like snow onto the marble steps. Because that night, I decided something. They wanted me gone. But soon they'd wish I had stayed invisible. The next morning the world seemed quieter than usual, as if it too were holding its breath. I sat by the kitchen window, watching the steam rise from my coffee. The torn pieces of that cheque still rested on the counter beside me, a reminder of how little people understood about dignity, and how cheaply they tried to buy it. My phone buzzed. A notification. Board meeting 10 a.m. The reminder glowed on the screen like a quiet secret, one the Beaumonts would never imagine existed. I smiled faintly, finished my coffee and changed into a crisp navy suit, not extravagant, just professional. The kind of clothing that didn't scream wealth, but whispered authority. At the office, people greeted me with the warmth reserved for those who mattered. "Good morning, Mrs. Harper," my assistant said, handing me the morning reports. "The contractors have confirmed the final phase of the Beaumont Estates project." Beaumont Estates. The irony was exquisite. The very name now tasted of something poetic justice. I reviewed the blueprint, scanning the numbers. Every detail of their mansion had passed through this office. Through me, the marble they flaunted, the polished doors, the lights that shimmered over their perfect dinners, all chosen, approved and signed off under my direction, and yet they'd sat across from me and tried to buy my absence for $700 a month. By 10, the conference room filled. 10 board members, a few investors, and the soft buzz of anticipation. As I took my seat at the head of the table, conversation stilled. "Let's begin," I said simply. For the next hour we went through figures, projections, and future contracts. I spoke clearly, decisively. It felt good. The quiet power of being heard, of leading without having to prove yourself. When the meeting ended, one of the partners, Mr. Fields, leaned over and whispered, "Beaumonts are lucky to have you overseeing their estate. That family can be complicated." I smiled slightly. "You have no idea." After the meeting, I stayed behind, looking out the window at the skyline. My reflection looked back at me, calm, composed, but something in my eyes had changed. There was no anger left, only clarity. That evening, Daniel stopped by the house. His eyes were heavy, his shoulders tense. "Mom, I need to talk to you." I set down my tea. "Of course." He sat across from me, fidgeting with his hands. "Claire told me what happened last night." "About the money, did she?" She said she didn't know they were going to do that. "She's furious at them." I nodded. "She's a good girl." He looked up, guilt in his eyes. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I didn't think they—" "Daniel," I interrupted gently. "You don't need to apologize for their behavior. You just need to see it for what it is." He was quiet for a long time. Then he asked softly, "What are you going to do?" "Nothing," I said. "Not yet," he frowned. "You're not angry?" I was. For about 5 minutes. Then I remembered who I am. He exhaled, rubbing his forehead. "They don't deserve you, Mom." "Maybe not," I said. "But life has a way of balancing the scales. You just have to wait long enough to see it happen." 2 days later, the cracks began to show. Veronica called my office. Her tone was polite, almost cheerful. "Evelyn, dear, I hope I'm not interrupting. We've just had some delays with the second phase of the house project. Could you possibly help expedite things?" I smiled into the phone. "Of course. I'll look into it." She had no idea who she was speaking to, not the consultant, but the decision-maker. I called the contractor. "Pause all non-essential work on Beaumont Estates," I instructed. "We need to review the permits and invoices before release." "Yes, ma'am," he said without question. By the afternoon, my assistant reported that Veronica had called again, twice. "She's quite insistent," she said. "I imagine she is," I replied. "But patience is a virtue." That evening I attended a charity event, one I had sponsored quietly for years. As I walked through the crowd, a voice called out, "Mrs. Harper!" It was Charles Beaumont. His surprise was almost comical. "I didn't expect to see you here," he said, recovering quickly with a smile. "You're involved with this foundation?" "I started it," I said simply. He blinked. "You—" "Yes, Harper Foundation. We fund programs for single parents returning to the workforce." For a brief moment his charm faltered. Then he laughed awkwardly. "Small world." "Smaller than you think," I replied. Later that night, as I left the event, I saw Veronica waiting by her car. She looked different, less composed, more human. "Evelyn," she called out, walking toward me. "I just wanted to thank you for helping with the house delays. It's been stressful." "Of course," I said evenly. "These things take time." She hesitated. "You seem very connected." "Everyone here knows you." "I've been around longer than I look," I replied with a faint smile. She studied me, her eyes narrowing as if trying to place a face she'd seen before. "Harper," she murmured. "That name sounds familiar." I tilted my head slightly. "It should." Before she could say anything else, her phone rang. She excused herself, flustered. I watched her go, then turned toward my car, the evening breeze cool against my skin. The next morning, Daniel texted, "Mum, something's wrong. The house project's been delayed indefinitely." Veronica's panicking. I smiled to myself. Justice doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it comes wrapped in red tape and polite emails. For years I'd lived quietly, letting the world assume it knew who I was. But now the cracks were showing, not in me, but in the perfect facade they'd built around their lives. And through those cracks, the truth was beginning to shine. They thought they could measure my worth in dollars. Soon, they'd learn the price of underestimating me couldn't be paid in any currency they owned. The morning the truth finally began to unravel, the air felt different, sharp, electric, like the world was holding its breath for what was about to be revealed. I arrived at the office early, the city still half asleep. My assistant, Julia, was already there, flipping through folders. When she saw me, she smiled nervously. "Mrs. Harper, the Beaumonts have been calling since 7. 3 times already. They said it's urgent." I took off my coat calmly and set it on the chair. "Did they say what it's about?" "Something about a financing issue with their estate project," she said. "Apparently, the permits are under review, and the bank froze their construction loan until your final approval." I nodded slowly. "Good," Julia blinked. "Good?" "Yes," I said. "Let them wait a bit. It's time they learned that not everything can be rushed with a signature or a smile." I went into my office, closed the door, and sat down. The folder marked Beaumont Estates. Phase 2 lay open on my desk. Their names filled the documents, line after line of approvals, budgets, design plans, contracts. All of it tied together under one name at the top, Harper and Fields Architecture. My name. Every inch of their polished empire had passed through my hands, though they'd never known it. To them, I'd been just another face at dinner, polite, simple, beneath their notice. Not any more. By noon, the calls had multiplied. I ignored them all. Then, at 12:37, an email came through from Veronica herself. The subject line read, "Urgent meeting request." I opened it. "Dear Evelyn, I believe there has been some sort of misunderstanding regarding our estate project. We've been told that construction is on hold pending your authorization. Could we meet in person to clarify things? Perhaps over coffee this afternoon. Sincerely, Veronica Beaumont." I stared at the screen for a long time, then typed my reply. "Of course. I'll see you at 3 p.m. at the Harper Building. Bring your husband." When they arrived, the receptionist buzzed my office. "Mr. and Mrs. Beaumont here to see you." "Send them in," I said. They entered together, Veronica in her perfect white coat, Charles beside her in a tailored suit. For the first time, they looked uneasy. Their confidence didn't quite fit the room. Veronica began immediately, her tone sugar-coated but trembling underneath. "Evelyn, we're so sorry to trouble you. There seems to have been a mix-up with the construction permits. We just wanted to clear things up before it becomes an inconvenience." I gestured for them to sit. "It's not a mix-up," I said softly. "I personally reviewed the project and found a few concerns that needed my attention." Charles frowned. "You reviewed it? I thought you only handled bookkeeping for the firm." I met his eyes. "You thought wrong," he blinked. Veronica looked between us, her expression faltering. I don't understand. I leaned forward slightly. The Harper in Harper and Fields, that's me. I co-founded the firm 20 years ago. I've overseen every major project we've ever done, including yours. The silence that followed was heavy and exquisite. Veronica's mouth opened slightly. You mean, yes, I said. The person who approved your mansion. The one who designed your dream. Charles shifted in his seat. But you, at dinner, played the part you expected me to play, I finished for him. It was easier to let you reveal who you really are. Veronica's face flushed. Evelyn, we didn't mean to offend you. But you did, I said calmly. And then you tried to pay me to vanish. $700 a month, wasn't it? Her breath caught. Charles looked at her sharply. What is she talking about? She stammered. It was a misunderstanding, Charles. I reached into my drawer and set the torn pieces of the cheque on the desk. I kept them. As a reminder. Veronica's composure cracked completely. I was just trying to help. No, I said quietly. You were trying to erase me! Charles leaned forward, his voice hard. Are you threatening us? Not at all, I said, still calm. I don't threaten people. I let truth do that for me. I slid a document across the desk, a formal notice of non-compliance. Your project has been temporarily suspended pending review of financial irregularities. It appears the contractor overstated costs by nearly 30%. We'll need to audit every expense. It might take months. Charles paled. Months? That property is our primary investment. I know, I said, but integrity takes time. Veronica whispered. You're doing this to punish us. I shook my head. No, Mrs. Beaumont. I'm doing this because it's the right thing to do. You just happen to be standing in the lesson. Her eyes filled with tears, but not the kind born from remorse, the kind born from disbelief that someone she'd looked down on could stand above her now. I stood. You wanted me gone. But I'm afraid that won't be happening. My company will finish your home when every detail is correct, every bill accounted for, and every worker treated fairly. Until then, consider this. A pause for reflection. They rose too, speechless. Charles muttered something about lawyers. Veronica just stared at me, lost, small for the first time in her life. As they turned to leave, I said one last thing. Veronica, she stopped. You once told me every woman has her price. I finally realized mine. She turned slowly. And what is that? Respect, I said. But it's not for sale. They left in silence. The door closed softly behind them. When they were gone, I sat back in my chair, the city lights beginning to flicker outside. For the first time in years, I felt the weight of silence again. But this time it wasn't loneliness. It was peace. The phone rang. It was Daniel. Mum, he said. Claire told me her parents' project just got delayed. Did you? Yes, I said. I did. He was quiet for a moment. They deserved it. No one deserves humiliation, I said softly. But everyone deserves to learn. He hesitated, then said, You're something else, Mum. I smiled. I've been told that. After we hung up, I looked out the window one last time. Down below, the city moved on, unaware that in one quiet office, justice had unfolded without shouting, without vengeance, just truth. And as the lights of the Beaumont mansion dimmed in the distance, I thought to myself, the higher people build their walls, the more beautiful it is when the cracks finally let the light in. 3 weeks had passed since that meeting in my office, the day the Beaumonts learned who I truly was. And in those 3 weeks, silence had become my ally again. It's strange how quickly the powerful go quiet when their illusion begins to crack. The once unstoppable Beaumont family had gone nearly invisible in town. Their mansion project sat unfinished, scaffolding rising like bones of a dream half built. Workers had stopped coming. Suppliers were whispering. The neighbours were asking questions. Daniel told me that Claire's parents were taking some time away, a polite way to say they were hiding from the mess they'd made. But time doesn't hide the truth, it only gives it shape. One rainy afternoon, as thunder rolled across the sky, my phone rang. It was Claire. Her voice trembled. "Evelyn, may I come see you?"
"Of course," I said.
"Come any time." When she arrived, her eyes were red from crying. She looked smaller than I remembered, weighed down by something heavier than guilt. "I didn't know, Evelyn," she said, "about what my parents did. About who you are," I smiled gently. "You don't need to apologize for them, dear. They made their choices." She shook her head. "They're losing everything. The bank pulled the funding, and the investors are backing out. My father blames you," I sighed. "He should blame his arrogance, not me. I didn't destroy him. He handed me the matches." Claire wiped a tear. "He keeps saying you're doing this for revenge." "No," I said softly. "If it were revenge, I'd let him build the house and then take it from him brick by brick. This isn't punishment, it's a mirror." She stared at me, trying to understand. "A mirror?" "Yes," I said. "So he can finally see the person he's been. So your mother can see what her kindness really looks like when she believes no one's watching." She was quiet for a long time. Then, almost in a whisper, she said, "They're not sleeping. They keep fighting." My mum said something I never thought I'd hear her say. She said she's ashamed. That made me pause. "I hadn't expected that. She said she wanted to call you," Claire continued. "To apologize, but she doesn't know how." I looked out the window. The rain was easing, leaving streaks on the glass like fading tears. "When she's ready to apologize, she'll find a way," I said. "But not for my sake. For hers." A week later, I received a letter, handwritten, the kind people rarely send anymore. The paper smelled faintly of roses and regret. "Evelyn, there are no excuses for what I said or did. I mistook your quiet strength for weakness, your humility for need. I see now how small that makes me. I don't expect forgiveness, but I needed you to know. I've learned something about the kind of woman I wish I were. Veronica." I folded the letter and placed it in my drawer beside the torn cheque. The two pieces of paper couldn't have been more different, one born of arrogance, the other of awakening. That night, I sat on my porch, the air cool and soft. Daniel joined me with 2 cups of tea. "Claire told me about the letter," he said. I nodded. "People don't change easily. But sometimes, when the light finally hits the cracks, it does something wonderful." He smiled. "You're quoting yourself again." "Maybe," I said, laughing quietly. "But some lessons are worth repeating." He took a sip, then looked out at the darkening horizon. "Do you think you'll ever forgive them?" "I already have," I said. "Forgiveness isn't for the people who hurt us. It's for the part of ourselves that deserves peace." He nodded slowly. "I think Claire's trying to make peace too. She's talking about selling that mansion and starting somewhere smaller." I smiled faintly. Sometimes smaller is bigger than people realize. For a long time we sat in silence, watching the last traces of daylight fade. Then Daniel spoke again softly. "You know, Mum, I don't think they'll ever forget you." "I hope not," I said. "Not because I want to haunt them, but because maybe next time they meet someone like me, they'll think twice before deciding her worth." The following week, I received another letter, this time from Charles. It was short, almost painfully so. "Mrs. Harper, I was wrong. Thank you for teaching me what I should have already known. See Beaumont No Excuses. No explanations, just truth, in its purest form." Months later, their mansion finally resumed construction, under new contractors, with stricter oversight. They completed it quietly, without a party, without guests. I passed by it once while driving. The house stood there, immaculate, but there was something different about it now. It looked less like a monument and more like a memory. In the end, I never sought revenge. What I wanted was balance, and life in its strange wisdom delivered it. And maybe that's the lesson of it all. The world doesn't need our anger to make things right. It just needs our courage to stay standing when others try to push us into the dark. That night, I closed my eyes and thought about everything that had happened, the dinner, the offer, the truth, the quiet aftermath. I realized that for years, I'd believed silence was my protection, but it wasn't. Silence was only powerful when it came after you'd spoken your truth, and now my silence finally meant peace. The seasons changed quietly, as they always do. The air grew softer, the sunlight warmer, and the rhythm of life settled into something calm and honest again. The world, it seemed, had exhaled. It had been months since the Beaumont story ended. The mansion was finished now. Elegant, yes, but quieter somehow. Not a monument to pride anymore, but to humility. I drove by it once on a Sunday afternoon. The garden that used to look too perfect was now a little wild. Flowers grew unevenly, and for the first time I thought it looked alive. Sometimes healing doesn't come through victory. It comes through surrender, the gentle kind, where you stop fighting what hurt you and start understanding it instead. Daniel and Claire married in a small ceremony at the chapel near the lake. No chandeliers, no marble floors, no long speeches about success. Just sunlight through stained glass, the sound of a guitar, and the quiet joy of people who finally understood what mattered. When Claire saw me that morning, she hugged me so tightly I could feel her heart beating. "Thank you," she whispered. "For everything," I smiled. "For the lesson?" She shook her head. "For your grace." Grace, that word stayed with me. Because in the end, that's what it was all about. Grace in how we rise. Grace in how we forgive. Grace in how we walk away from people who never saw our worth and still wish them peace. After the ceremony, Veronica approached me slowly. She looked different, softer, older, real. "Evelyn," she said quietly, "I don't expect forgiveness, but I hope someday when you think of me it won't be with anger." I looked at her for a long time. "Anger fades," I said gently. "What stays is what we learn." Her eyes filled with tears, and for the first time I believed they were honest. She reached out and I took her hand. No more words were needed. Later that evening, after the sun had dipped below the hills and the lights of the town began to glow, I sat on my porch again, the same spot where all of this had begun. The same cup of coffee, the same old wooden chair, but I wasn't the same woman anymore. I thought about that first night, the one where I was offered $700 to disappear. I could almost laugh at it now, not because it was funny, but because it reminded me how far I had come from the woman who once thought silence was safety. The truth is, disappearing was never the answer. The real strength lies in being seen, truly seen, even by those who once tried to erase you. I glanced at the stars, bright and steady above the quiet street. Somewhere out there, the Beaumonts were learning to live differently. And maybe that was enough. Daniel and Claire would visit often, bringing laughter and warmth into my small house. Sometimes we'd talk late into the night and he'd ask me, "Mum, do you ever regret how it all happened?" And I'd always say the same thing. No, because every cruel thing that was said, every door that was closed, it all led me here. To peace, to truth. He once told me, "You're the strongest woman I know." But I don't think strength is what carried me through. It was love. Love for my son, for justice, and eventually for myself. The story didn't end with revenge or triumph or applause. It ended with quiet understanding. With a woman who finally learned that her worth had never been up for negotiation. And maybe, somewhere deep down, it ended with forgiveness too. So if you ever find yourself standing in the shadow of someone's judgment, remember this. You don't have to disappear to be free. You just have to stand still long enough for the truth to find you, and when it does, you'll see. The light always finds its way through the cracks.